So we can start here in Albany, Alana Cadell Tuckey with the Office of Environmental Justice and Chair.
Chris Cole from NYSERDA. Neil Muscatello from DOH.
Joe McNerney, New York State Department of Labor.
Elizabeth Firth, Department of Labor.
And we will start with the New York City Boardroom. Sonal.
Sonal Jesselwiak for Environmental Justice.
Okay. I don't see Roa yet. We'll go to Utica. Mary Beth.
Hi, Mary Beth McEwen. Hi, Mary Beth McEwen, Cornell Cooperative Extension.
Hi. And Raybrook, Jill.
Bill Hank, Anka.
Hi, Jill. And Avon, Abby.
Solutions Accelerator.
And Tim Walsh, Regional Director as well.
Hi, Tim. And Region 9. Did Rawa make it yet? Well, Rawa is not there yet, but she will be there relatively soon. Joining us today, we have Deputy Commissioner for Equity and Justice, Adriana Espinosa, and we also have, who else is in the back? I can't see. It's very, very tiny. Buffalo, can you unmute quickly? Oh, I think they might be far enough from the. Can you guys mute and unmute your, the room? Are you guys able to do that? Or does someone need to be closer to the screen?
I'm on it, Alana. Just give me one moment. There you go.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, go ahead.
Oh, there
We're
we go.
on, yes.
Can you hear us?
So
Yeah, we
we
can hear you
have,
now.
oh, good.
Oh, okay.
We have Adriana and Julie Barrett O'Neill, the Regional Director. Carrie. And Carrie
everyone.
Pickard DePriest from Permits.
Hi, everyone. Okay, we have a quorum present, so we can begin our proceedings. I'd like to start with voting on a resolution. As folks may know, yesterday DEC hosted a hearing on the bylaws to allow for Climate Justice Working Group members to participate in Climate Justice Working Group meetings virtually if there are extenuating circumstances. So the proposed amendment allowed for working group members who have given advance notice, and as long as there is a physical quorum available, can participate in Climate Justice Working Group meetings virtually, provided they are on camera and clearly identified and without having to have the public present in that space. So in order to approve that amendment to the bylaws, we will need to vote. So I will basically go through, I think the easiest way is to go through sort of the roll call and ask for yays or nays. So I will start here with Albany. Chris?
Yay.
Neil?
Yay.
Joe?
Yay.
We'll go to New York City. Sonal?
Yay.
We'll go to Raybrook. Jill?
Yay.
And we'll go to Utica. Mary Beth?
Okay.
And Abby and Avon?
Yay.
And I don't see Rawa, and I am also yay. So with all the yays, the measure is approved and the resolution, so working group members who have alerted me in advance of the meeting, provided a physical quorum is present, are permitted to meet virtually. So resolution is passed. Don't know if we need applause for that, but moving on, next slide. And sorry, next slide after that. So here is today's agenda. We are going to have a quick overview of the disadvantaged communities criteria comments. We're going to have a talk quickly about the timeline for the work plan so we can get to the finalization of the criteria. have a quick air monitoring update, discuss the scoping plan, and then talk about what the next steps are. So, you know, what the next steps are for the disadvantaged communities criteria, the air monitoring training, having, you know, when we're gonna have the benefits and investments discussion, and, you know, possibly have a conversation on the proposed economy-wide policy discussion. Next slide. So sorry, it's going through. Where are we now? So now we are, we're gonna move to the DAC comments overview. Alex, are you on?
I am on. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Woohoo!
Yep,
It
we
worked.
can hear you. We can see you.
It's nice to see you all, but you're very, very hard to see. So just like wave largely if you have a comment and you want to talk. Next slide, please. Want to give you a broad overview of the DAC comments that we've been reviewing. First of all, it's just really nice to see you all again and be back here with you all. So just got to say that. We got a total of 3,124 comments. And it's been really great. We've just started a chance to really kind of dig in and start coding them and looking at them. We're trying to approach this from a very much scientific way of trying to code everything so that we can give you a breakdown of where, you know, the different comments come from and what they're saying and suggesting. I do want to note, though, one of the bigger areas of this is that there are 3,124 comments, but 88% of those, 2,743, are basically duplicates of 8 different form letters. We're still reviewing the rest of the comments. Those 8 form letters, we've done a little bit more analysis because, you know, they're 8. So I want to give you a rundown of those form letters. I think they're very important to go through specifically because a lot of people sent them. And then after that, I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of the rest of the comments. And I also would love to hear how, you know, after I've given you the rundown, how you would like to review the comments. We want to make this as transparent, as open as possible. You can actually go and download all the comments now publicly, and Alana will share that link if you want to do that. Sorry. Okay. So basically there are 8 different form letters that I want to go through first, and then I'll give you kind of a quick rundown of some of the other comments that we've seen so far. So next slide, please. Hopefully you all can see this, which is big enough. The form letters that we saw, there were some main key themes across these different form letters. Again, a lot of people sent these over, so I think it's really important that we give weight to the fact that a lot of people thought this was a very important thing to do. So the key themes was the first one, transparency being very critical, that more ground truthing needs to happen. And in fact, a lot of the, not just the form letters, but a lot of the comments we got were in essence giving us more input, more ground truthing to take into account the data from different communities around New York State. Several of the form letters and also the regular comments, the individual comments, talked about population characteristics, low income, BIPOC populations being very important, and really they were articulating that they should have more weight in the DAC criteria. There was also a strong desire for an annual review and also transparency again for how the money is being spent and whether it is leading to benefits to the communities that have been identified as disadvantaged. And then just again, going with that transparency is integration of feedback across communities, the Climate Justice Working Group and state agencies. So these are kind of the summary of the 8 different ones. I won't go through all of this. But I think these are very, very important, particularly the top 3, a lot of people sent on. Any questions before I move on? Okay, next slide, please.
Let me know, I can make the slides bigger.
So rest of the comments, there were 142 non-form comments that provided recommendations on what we should do differently with a DAC. These range from different regions, again, that ground truthing of what should be a DAC and what shouldn't be a DAC. There were recommendations on additional indicators to include, and I've put those as a summary. This is not scientifically like ordered by, the amount and things like that, but these are just of the quick scan that I could get through. Here are some that people had mentioned in their comments. There was also some discussion and commenting on the different methodology or the approach of combining different indicators together, how we weight population characteristics again. There was some discussion also on including rural communities and the weighting between rural and more urban communities. There were 4 comments on recommending shifting the language or the use of DAC to something that does not have disadvantaged in the nomenclature. There were a couple comments on climate policy, and then just generally more on documentation and transparency. These are just our first kind of pass through of what we found with the comments. But clearly when you have 3,000 of them, we have a lot more to do. The bulk of them, again, are those form letters. And what I want to do is start breaking those down even more so that we're listing out every single thing that was specifically specified in each of those form letters and all the other ones. So that means what we'll do right now, we're coding every single recommendation. We're identifying every single indicator that people are recommending. Some of those, I will say, people, we got several comments on lead being included in the DAC kind of as an indicator. And, historically, we have included, in so much as we can, lead as operationalized, how can I put this, by Housing Vintage, because that's the best data we have. So some of these comments are going to be just more of us being clear about how and when we've considered certain indicators and what we dismissed and what we didn't earlier on. So that's a little bit more on the documentation side. But others, we need to start looking at what data there are available and seeing whether they can be included or whether they help or not. So those are our next steps. If you want to go to the next slide. So that's basically what I said here. But we're going to list out those next steps and the recommendations in the comments. What I'd like to provide all of you is a giant Excel sheet with all the comments and with our codes for those comments so that you can review them and see how we looked at them. But you can also see every single comment if you want to. Right now, there are several that are still PDF'd that we're copying and pasting over. So it's a little bit laborious. But once we get there, we'll be able to give you a bit more information, but you'll also have some of our codes so you can kind of sift through things. I wanted to see if that worked for you, or if you'd like to look through the comments now, what would work best for you?
I'm okay with a spreadsheet. Thank you.
Me too.
Okay, there's this like flying hand. Is that a high five or is that a I have a question? Or I agree?
Hi, Dr. Dunn. This is Joe McNerney with the DOL. I just had a quick question on the, do you have a heat map or is there a geographical breakdown yet on where these all came from?
Not yet. We have some of that information, and I can look at that and provide it. It's not as granular as that. Some people provided more granular information about geography where they were or not, and some others don't. So we'll try to compile it in a way that makes most sense and send that to you.
Great, thank you.
And I just wanted to jump in, it's Alana, and with regards to the actual comments to the raw data, we are going to get those to you. I'm just looking to get copies of those that have eliminated the identifying information. So, no addresses or emails or anything like that. But but I will have that available for everyone. But that is information, if anybody wants to get it right now, they just can't wait, is available on GovQ&A if they wanted to look at that. And I can send everybody the link to that.
I see a flying high five thing for the New York City boardroom.
Oh, there we go. Just as like a process question for my answer. So if we say Excel spreadsheet, you all are sending a spreadsheet and then we are unpacking more in the next working group meeting, is that the idea?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is send you, once the next working group meeting, we'll have a lot more data and a lot more kind of refined. And before that meeting, I'd like to send you the Excel sheet with coded, comments so that you can see everything that we're seeing. And what we would like to bring to the next meeting is, hey, this is from the comments. These were the main recommended methodological changes or indicator changes, and this is where we want to go next. What do you guys think? Here's the ones that we think we've already, based on kind of our giant rubric, if you remember, to a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we dismissed for X, Y, and Z reason. And so we'll provide our recommendation on what to do with the various comments or recommendations in the comments, and then have you look at those as well. That I'd like to discuss next time.
And Alex, when approximately is next time?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you say it again?
Yeah, this is Abby. When approximately is next time? What is the expected timeline on this?
That's a good question, and was something that actually flows right into Alana's next kind of talking about the timeline and how we're going to break this down, because it is a lot of work in a short amount of time, as per usual. So we're running fast on this, but I'll let Alana answer that.
Actually, we can move on to the next slide. And so now we're going to discuss the work plan and timeline. Next slide, please. So technically, there really isn't a legislative timeline for the finalization of the disadvantaged communities criteria, not like the scoping plan. So we can take forever, but we're not going to do that. We definitely want the final criteria to be finalized as soon as possible, because it really is critical for policy development and to keep everything on track with greenhouse gas emissions and benefits and investments, and just the effectiveness of the criteria itself. So because it really is pretty essential to the full implementation of the Climate Act, we really do want it to be finalized before the first quarter of 2023. So, roughly, you'll see from the slide, we're thinking April 1st, 2023, that would be a release. It lines up with the budget. Should we have an on-time budget, which we should. And this should give us enough time to properly review and analyze the comments and consider any of the actionable elements and items, and determine, if we need to make any changes to the draft criteria, and have those conversations on those changes and those debates, and still have it, released in enough time for folks to start to implement these policy changes. Slide is numbers, this one, can't tell. So again, what you're looking at, we're on the right slide, sorry. So this is sort of like a little timeline that I, threw together. It's not final, it's just sort of a rough idea of how this could work. So, obviously not using this meeting as an analysis meeting. In November, we might need to meet a few times to just, review the analyzed public comments, just reviewing the comments, reviewing the structure, reviewing, the codes, and just, looking through them. Obviously, folks will look through them, on their time, but, meet a couple of times in November just to, get an idea with that. In December through January, we definitely want to look to consider actionable items and determine potential changes. I don't know if and determine that, also running through February, determine any potential changes. The goal is basically to be able to vote on the final criteria in March. and then, give us a month to actually, review and report, which we'll be doing throughout the process. But it'll give us at least, a month or at least a couple of weeks to make sure everything is compiled so it can be fully released. And then we can actually look forward and start planning what climate justice working group meetings will look like in the future. But that's just sort of like a rough estimate and a rough timeline of what we're looking at. We still are, Jill has a question.
I just wanted to clarify, after we decide on the final criteria, is there an additional public comment period, or are we all set with public comments?
No, we're all set with public comments. Once we finalize the criteria, it's finalized. Mind you, we do come back on an annual basis to review the criteria and to review the data. So, and we'll have the Climate Justice Working Group email address open. So if folks are, if there are issues, we won't be taking official comments, but people can still send us emails. They can still monitor the process. And if they have additional information or ground truthing information that they'd like to share with us, they can still be shared through our email address. So the goal is to make sure that meetings still stay at an hour and a half, because I know that nobody really wants to be in a 3-hour meeting. But because we're keeping them to an hour and a half, we are going to need to have more frequent meetings. So we definitely are going to need folks to also review documents and materials between meetings, and to, be prepared to discuss and, discuss all of the open questions, because we definitely want to make sure that we're getting everybody's opinion and everybody's thoughts when we're finalizing this process. Sonal.
Yeah, thanks, Alana. And this is just my opinion and something I'd like to hear from my fellow working group members, how they feel. But I have a little bit of concern around the timeline being, I thought we were going to be finalizing a criteria sooner. And I'm just thinking about the implications of waiting, a number of months past the scoping plan being adopted, because I think a lot of us are already in fights with different entities that are saying they're not going to be doing investments or tracking in DACs until there's a final criteria. So it does feel like quite an immediate need. And I'm just kind of bringing up the option of finding ways to finalize sooner. But that's just coming from me, and maybe I don't know what the other working group members feel, because it definitely is hefty work. So I'm keeping that in mind. But it would be really ideal to have a final criteria earlier than April.
Right. No, absolutely understood. I just didn't want to. We were thinking about this. We were trying not to put pressure on the working group to align, our process with the Climate Action Council, and to try to feel, we didn't want anyone to feel rushed into finalizing, the criteria, just simply to allow, for those processes to be aligned. But we can definitely talk about the timeline. Adriana, you had a question or a comment?
Just a comment. I wanted to underscore what you just said, Alana, that this timeline here on the slide is proposed and something that the team put together for the working group members to reflect on. And as I reflected on, the meetings that I had with Climate Justice Working Group members when I first started back at the beginning of the year, one of the things that I heard was, to make sure that we are structuring our meetings to respect how busy Climate Justice Working Group members are. And so we wanted to build out something that can, respect the request for no longer than 90-minute meetings, and so that's one thing we kept in mind here. I think we can take it back internally to see if we can tighten up this timeline. One, I think, important thing that I just want to be transparent about is that that may mean more meetings or longer meetings in order to get that done, because as Alana said, we want to make sure that we're doing right by the public who provided these comments, and making sure that we're going through all of them in a meaningful way and making decisions intentionally about how to incorporate them. So just wanted to underscore what you said, Alana.
Thanks. Abby?
So I know I'm kind of record on this, but to the extent that we can get these meetings on the calendar, sooner rather than later. One thing that has historically slowed us down at times is just the scheduling process. And I know, I really appreciate actually, Adriana, what you just mentioned about respecting our time. And I know for myself personally, one of the challenges with these meetings is often just that I'm often booked already by the time I get the, kind of the dual calendar invites and all of that. So if we could just get all these calendars or meetings for the next several months on the calendar well in advance, that would just be helpful for planning and kind of, being able to organize ourselves. That'd be my request.
Yeah, absolutely, understood. But unfortunately with Doodle, unfortunately, we don't have the feature that allows us to have people plug their schedules in and plan meetings that way. So I'm familiarizing myself with SurveyMonkey because apparently we can use that without needing administrative permissions. So I will be sending out sort of a little mini survey to kind of get an idea of what days work best for folks and what events over the next few months that need to be worked around. So I hope to send that out to everyone tomorrow, just to give everybody some time to take a look at that, take a look at their calendars and identify some dates so we can have those advanced dates and times. Because we also need to have advanced dates and times when it comes to reserving meeting spaces as well, now that we need to be in person. So thank you, Abby. That's definitely something that we would like to do, that we're definitely looking to do. Chris?
Yep. Hey, Alex, are you still on? Yeah, so I guess I'm thinking about the timeline for finalizing the criteria. I think a lot of that will be dependent on, what the level of analysis and assessment is going to be. I know you said, you guys are just going through and, identifying the categories of comments we've received, but do you have any early sense for, the level of, analysis or assessment, that might be needed just based on the number of comments that have come in on indicators or methodology?
Yeah,
Because I guess that'll help us, inform what that timeline looks like, right? So I think if folks can get a sense for what we're actually gonna have to accomplish over the next, few months, then that might change the way we're thinking about, this timeline.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. So the things that I see coming up here that I think are pretty vital and important to keep in mind is, we're going through the comments and we have a pretty good list of indicators that we know we want to look at. Say diabetes, we know we want to look at that. So we've kind of preemptively gone and are working to try to identify the information we can get. For all of those indicators, we have to download the data, clean it, figure out how to input it or, place it into the DAC criteria, and then see whether it changes anything substantively or not. Assess whether that means that we take something out. So analytically, every single one of those indicators is going to take, on our side, 10 to 20 hours to try to rework and figure out how to get in there. And then that's not including the reworking of, say, some of the methodological components. And in every single one of those cases, we want to go through the working group and talk through those elements. I'm hoping we're going to combine a lot of those together into a couple, big, hard meetings. But I think that brain hard, not hard. I think that that's the part that makes me most worried about trying to speed this up, just because it's going to be a process, as you all have lived through before, but we're trying to speed it up as much as possible by, kind of concurrently working on downloading data and identifying what data we are as we scan through things. So I can't give you a definitive, it's going to take us 2 months to do this, but I can give you a per different one that we identify. I think it's going to be 10, 20 hours of our work and then meeting and making sure that everyone is informed about what we're doing.
Thanks, Alex. That's helpful.
Rawa, you had your hand up?
I did. Hi, everybody. It's good to almost see you. It's good to be with all of you. My question is kind of piggybacking off of what Sonal was saying. I thought in my mind that there was going to be a moment to reconcile the scoping plan and the DAC criteria, and you know what our agenda is, like giving the entire scoping plan a sort of like justice or equity lens that would be filtered through the DAC requirements. And maybe that's an impossible task, but is there going to be a conversation that is had about reconciling that some of maybe the recommendations that come out of the scoping plan are actually create worse issues for frontline or disadvantaged communities? Does that make sense?
Yep, no, that makes sense. It's actually another topic that we're going to be discussing is re-engagement with the Climate Action Council on the scoping plan. I couldn't tell. Samir, did you have your hand up? Or did you just move? Okay, he just moved. He's a little far away. But we'll definitely be talking about that. Samir is going to give an update on the scoping plan and discussion on re-engagement and that exact item of reconciling disadvantaged communities criteria and the scoping plan and the climate justice aspects of the scoping plan.
Okay. Cool.
So that actually brings us to my other point, because I'm glad we're talking about the timeline. Alex and Illume will definitely be available to provide some one-on-one support to folks to help work through some of the concepts and through the ideas. So they can also, there is also the potential to kind of, help this to move faster. So like I said, it's good that we talked about this to sort of, emphasize speeding the process up, potentially dividing into subgroups in order to work on specific topic areas in between our meeting times. And Illume has volunteered to facilitate those conversations and to facilitate that process in order to, and then bring that information, to the larger group to determine what, you've synthesized from the comments and those specific topic areas. Next slide, please. So before we move on to the air monitoring quality update, are there any questions on that aspect?
Alana, I am curious, those working group topics, what, like, for example, they might be?
So it's going to be based on the areas that Illume has identified, the comment areas. So there might be something, if inland flooding has come up a couple of times. So there might be a subgroup that sort of branches off to address inland flooding, a sort of subgroup that branches off to discuss the race related indicators, maybe another group that discusses some of the pollution. So we'll be teasing those out based on the topics that are sort of recurring and that have been, synthesized through the comments. And just if the goal is to, for folks, if they are feeling that they're, want to focus a little bit more in that area, they can branch off into subgroups and work with Illume to kind of work on those particular comment areas.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And that's something we can definitely have a, broader conversation, probably I say offline and via email, but I definitely wanted to bring that up today. So what I'm hearing from folks is that we should probably rethink the timeline. We can probably go through it again. What I'll do is we'll get together as a staff and we can come up with a few different timeline options to try to move things along a little bit faster. Obviously, the draft timeline was with an eye towards, making sure that this was the 100% latest that we could turn in a finalization of the criteria. So we can definitely work back to see if there's something that we can get done and possibly get it done a little bit earlier. But, understanding that will involve additional meetings and additional time. We definitely want to be respectful of folks' time, especially as we get towards the holidays. We don't want to put too much on anybody's plate, which is, why the idea of subgroups might be helpful to sort of speed up the process. So that's definitely something we can get in touch with you about offline. Okay, if we're good with that, we'll move on to the community air quality monitoring update, and I will throw it over to Adriana.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Someone give me a thumbs up. Okay. All right, I'll try to go through this relatively quickly, just so that we can get through the agenda. Next slide, please. Okay, so wanted to provide a quick update on the work that DEC, particularly the Division of Air Resources, has been doing with our Community Air Monitoring Initiative that is required under the Climate Act. It is a mobile screening effort. There were, some of this will be a refresher, but there were 10 communities that were selected that are disadvantaged communities that were identified as having a high air pollution burden. And there were 12 DAC indicators that were developed by the Climate Justice Working Group that we used to determine this air pollution burden. And this methodology was previously reviewed by the Climate Justice Working Group, I think in our last meeting. And so we've got cars with air monitoring sensors now driving block by block, collecting data on emissions and pollution in those 10 communities to better understand air quality. And the goal of this mobile monitoring approach is to provide additional and hyperlocal information to identify emission sources and that we can use to prioritize areas for action and emissions reductions. So monitoring began in the first 4 communities in July, and then the second phase was the next 6 communities, and that began in September. You can see on the screen there which communities were in the first and second phase. The first phase was the Buffalo area, Capital Region, Bronx, and Manhattan. And then phase 2, Brooklyn, Hempstead, and some surrounding communities on Long Island, Queens, Rochester, Syracuse, and then Yonkers and some surrounding communities there in Westchester County. Next slide. Okay, so quick overview on so the community engagement that we did. DEC held 2 meetings in each of the communities both prior to the start of any air monitoring. The meetings were structured to introduce the program, to explain the mobile monitoring approach, and to describe how the communities were selected for monitoring. We also benefited greatly from community input on air quality concerns. We heard about sensitive populations, land use, activities of concern in their communities, and we used, this information was used to guide the final study boundaries in each community, which I'll detail in just a moment. So just to reiterate here, we have these 2 meetings, and we worked with the communities to sort of define the boundaries based on their community concerns. So just to quickly summarize here, in Buffalo, a lot of the concerns that we heard were about municipal waste incinerator, a landfill near Niagara Falls, and so there were concerns about wanting to make sure we included those areas and that the monitoring would happen at different times of day because local community members were saying that the operations happens sometimes overnight. In the Bronx, there was also concerns raised about the movement of waste at transfer stations, trucking, peaker plants, and we also heard about dirt bikes as a concern and some requests for us to monitor in the peninsulas, on places like Grand Concourse to understand maybe the impact that those can have on air quality. In the Capital Region, we heard about concerns about a facility in Cohoes and how particulates from there in the communities of Cohoes can move downwind to other parts of the Capital Region, particularly North Troy. And so we made some adjustments based on that feedback, and was also heard a lot about traffic in Albany. And then in Manhattan, the North River wastewater treatment facility came up as a major concern, and there were questions about making sure we would monitor in those areas. Next slide. Okay, continuing down the list here of summary of the community input for Brooklyn. Both community residents and the Borough President's Office expressed concerns about the BQE and particularly playgrounds and places where children congregate and play under elevated portions of the expressway. and specifically asked that mobile measurements include on and off ramps where near some of where those playgrounds are located and where vehicles may idle. Another major thing that we heard was the concern about the growth of warehouses, so sort of last mile facilities such in communities like Red Hook, and the increase in diesel emissions that goes towards servicing those operations. In Queens, we heard a lot about the movement of waste, both waste by rail in particular, and also trucks that drive through Southeast Queens in particular. And there was an ask for us to monitor near rail yards and transfer stations, which we did accommodate before finalizing our boundaries. And then Rochester, the initial study boundary that we presented to the community was just within Rochester city limits, and the community members asked us to include disadvantaged communities with a high air pollution burden, even if they're right outside of city limits, which again we did adjust. Next slide. Okay, in Syracuse, we heard residents asked for monitoring along both sides of the interstate, of Interstate 81, just south of Syracuse, as there are environmental justice communities that flank both sides of the interstate. We heard that the western portion of Syracuse includes heavy industry along I-690, and the study boundary was expanded to include some communities in that location. For Hempstead, initially our boundaries were only in Hempstead, and we added a few other hamlets in the, I think Newcastle, Roosevelt, to make sure we're including other EJ communities in the surrounding area. And then finally, for Yonkers and Mount Vernon, after hearing feedback, we did expand that boundary to include areas of New Rochelle. When community members voiced concern about the traffic burdens that come from I-95. So that's a quick update on how the initial engagement went. Next slide. Okay, so for engagement moving forward, DEC has committed to providing quarterly reports to each of the 10 communities. The reports are going to include things like progress on the monitoring collection, result summaries, and observations. However, we've also developed a proposal for ongoing engagement between those quarterly updates, and we're eager to hear member feedback on that. So the goals of what we're trying to do is to establish early partnerships in each of the 10 communities in the monitoring phase before we get to the mitigation phase, right? So that we establish relationships and we build up trust in communities before we get to the sort of solutions generation portion of this work. We also wanted to create space for shared access to information and updates, and an ability for community members to, if they would like to, meet independently of state involvement to develop their own priorities for mitigation strategies that they can then propose to DEC based on the findings of the study. And so in solving for all of those things, we put together a proposal for establishing community advisory committees in each of the 10 communities. The committees will serve 3 purposes. Again, sharing insights from the monitoring, general awareness and education, attuning to community knowledge in an ongoing basis. So, creating sort of a back and forth dialogue so that we know if there is new construction happening on this block, or maybe the trucks usually roll around about 4 a.m. Things that are helpful to the state to know as we're doing this monitoring, that sort of thing. And then finally, and importantly, is respecting community-driven solutions during the mitigation phase of this program. We think having these committees set up can help allow for that. So the Office of Environmental Justice will coordinate, are proposing to coordinate with the AIR team, the Climate Justice Working Group, and our regional offices to identify community leaders in each of the 10 communities to serve jointly with DEC as conveners of the committee. The convener will lead the development of different priorities or research questions, community priorities for mitigation, after the monitoring ends, or sooner if the advisory committee would like to do that. And some initial ideas that we had for community members of the committees could be the DEC's regional public participation representatives, if they're interested, climate justice working group members themselves. And then we also created a robust list of stakeholders in all 10 communities already from the first 2 meetings that we held before the monitoring started. So we would also invite those stakeholders to participate in this process. But whoever we identify as sort of being a local community leader to help us, convene this group, we would also provide them a period of time to help identify other potential participants in the committee. And so that's where we are now. This is all just sort of a proposal, but I'm eager to hear any thoughts or questions or feedback from Climate Justice Working Group members. Go ahead. I think, are we still unmuted? Okay, go ahead, Rolla.
I just first of all want to say thank you so much for all of your work. That was a lot. Is there going to be, are you going to share out with us like all of the things? Because I felt like these were just like highlights, or the places that you specifically talked about in Buffalo. Are there more places, or those are just where you added new places where you guys did monitoring?
So I think what I just went through is sort of a summary of like the high level things we heard and where we changed the boundaries. We have we set up a website on DEC's DEC page for this, where we provided recordings of all of our stakeholder meetings. I believe the sort of maps of the areas. I can work with our AIR team to see if there is maybe a more detailed summary that we can pull out so that you can see, what we heard in the areas.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly, Adriana, we do have that website, and each area has a map that shows the areas for the study. And somebody from our team just put it in the chat, so if anyone needs that, they can grab it there.
Well, we're in person now, so.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. So it's...
yeah, we'll make sure it gets shared.
Okay, great. Thank you.
2 quick questions. The quarterly reports, I'm wondering how digestible a form those will be in terms of, are they going to be something that are, really ready to share with community members and will be pretty accessible to a broad audience already that we can simply be kind of passing on or sharing out? So that's question number 1, and I guess I'll pause there.
I don't know if you want to take this, Adriana, or I would. So we expect to host public meetings to report out and provide updates at these quarterly meetings. We'll also compile the slides and post those on this website, as we've posted the previous meetings on the website as well.
Okay.
And I do think they'll be digestible. We are trying to make all the materials, easy to read at a level that non-technical people could understand.
Great, thank you for that. The second question is, would community members who participate in the community advisory committees be able to receive some sort of compensation for their time?
That's something that that we would have to discuss. I think one thing that we did put out was the series of grants to support the Community Air Monitoring Initiative. If there was interest from those applicants in using any of their capacity building grants to support their work on this effort, that is something that was eligible for the grants. But I think particularly, I don't think Climate Justice Working Group members can receive funding to.
Oh, I don't mean. I don't mean. I didn't mean. But I mean, I guess maybe I should clarify. Maybe I don't understand. Who is the target participant in? I mean, you mentioned Climate Justice Working Group members, but would community residents? And I'm specifically thinking about residents in disadvantaged communities. Be who you would want to be on these committees?
Yes, to serve on the committees. We're thinking residents or any interested local stakeholders, community-based organizations, certainly environmental justice or environmental groups. I think we're opening it pretty broadly. For the sort of co-lead and co-convener, what we're thinking is sort of a trusted community leader, maybe even considering like a local elected official or a local mayor's office to partner with us, or a local academic institution, someone with the capacity to help us bring folks in.
You know, I don't know if all municipalities have this, but we have a very robust, what is it called, Block Club Federation or what have you, and it's actually, it happens through the city of Buffalo, and all the Block Club folks, like, they apply, and once you're a designated Block Club, you're a part of it. There's over 300 of them. So maybe whoever is leading the federation itself would be a pretty good lead person to engage on this, just because they can distribute their newsletters to all of the different Block Clubs across the city.
Got it. That's a good. I'm gonna write that down. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then to your earlier question about reporting, I think that there are a few more slides after this on the reporting. And so if we want to, unless there are other questions on engagement, I'm happy to move on to reporting.
I think just for me, you know, I would just advocate, I don't know who, if any, what organization, if any, in our region, you know, received funds through that grant opportunity and what work they might be doing. So perhaps this is all taken care of and in good hands. But in terms of making sure that this information does get out to communities and that representation on that community advisory committee is appropriately diverse and appropriately representative of the most impacted communities would be important from my perspective. So, and I'm saying this because, you know, in the 2 meetings that I attended, the initial kind of input or stakeholder engagement meetings, I didn't get the sense that the representation there, I could be completely wrong, but was really representative and that there was that diversity. So I don't know, but I do think that'd be important moving forward to make sure that whatever the criteria is for makeup of that committee, that it is, you know, pretty well thought, which I'm sure you guys are.
Yeah, heard that. Thank you.
Okay. Were there any other questions on the engagement piece? Okay. All right. So first, I just wanted to remind the Climate Justice Working Group members that you can have access to quarterly reports as well as license to the ACLIMA Pro, which will get you you know, the ability to take a look in your specific areas or any of the study areas across the state. It will also give you access to the raw unverified results via ACLIMA Pro. The ACLIMA Pro platform includes details on where monitoring is taking place, the progress to date on that monitoring, first available data showing summaries as results are collected, and access to the raw unverified results. The screenshot to the right, and I'm sorry, it looks like a little bit of it is cut off, shows an example of the first available data for Buffalo. This map shows the range of fine particulate matter, or PM2.5 measurements, for each road segment. The higher values are shown as orange, and the lower values are shown as gray and blue. The snapshot of data shows some of the higher values are along major highways and arterials running through Buffalo. But overall, the median concentrations are relatively lower. More data needs to be collected and sources need to be evaluated before definite conclusions can be drawn. This preliminary data should be viewed qualitatively. As data are collected, staff here at DEC will screen for unusual concentrations. Since the results are collected using sensor technology, additional work is needed to ensure the results are valid. Some of the follow-up activities include working with our contractor Aclima to evaluate the results and compare them to nearby DEC stations or monitors. Next slide. It's important to remember, as data are collected and verified, the summaries may change. At the end of a full year of monitoring, data undergo validation and final estimates will be available. DEC's webpage will include progress information and data summaries for the public. Since the overarching goal of the air monitoring effort is to develop emission reduction strategies, these earlier investigations, including source identification with additional data sources, will help with reduction strategies. The key to developing effective strategies will be a partnership with the community and the Climate Justice Working Group. And let's see, next slide. So the contractor Aclima is ready to provide initial onboarding training for the Aclima Pro tool at your convenience. Again, all Climate Justice Working members are eligible for access. And we want to know, would you also prefer to schedule a group training or individual training with DEC Air Team to further answer questions about Aclima Pro? And I'll stop there and take any questions you may have or any feedback on, timing of the training, when you might want access to Aclima Pro, and what kind of training you'd like, whether you want just the training from Aclima or some group or individual training by DEC Division of Air Resources staff. Oh, I see a couple of hands. I think Abby?
I don't need to go first, but I think I could probably intuit the question or the answer to this, but just to be sure, does it have to be me personally who is receiving this training, or can it be someone else within our organization?
I believe you can designate another person in your organization. That should be fine. We understand that you may have someone that has more time to look at that or might have a little bit of background in air quality. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Were there other questions? I can't really see everyone, so.
New York City boardroom is a question.
Okay. All right.
Less a question and more, I guess, a response. I think I'm glad Abby asked that question because I was going to ask that too. We have some folks on WEAC staff that would be appropriate for, being the designee for this. That's not me. And so I think, and we would like that training for Aclima Pro. So my answer is really whenever we can do a training is great. And I don't think there's a need to do it individually, I guess, unless that's a scheduling reason, but I think a group training would work. It'd be perfectly adequate for us.
Sure, and what I'll say too is that, Aclima is going to help with that initial onboarding process, getting everyone set up with their accounts and having, I think, 2 training sessions. But if there's any questions or need some help later on, our DEC staff are available as well to field a few questions. Again, I have a hard time seeing hands, so if there's a question or comment, just speak up. Okay. If not, Alana, I believe Samir is up next.
Samir is next. Next slide. And Samir is going to give us an update on the scoping plan and CAC movements and opportunities for engagement. Samir.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see everybody. So I'll just give, can you go to the next slide, please? I'll give a quick update on where things are with the finalization of the scoping plan and processing the public comments. We received about, the Climate Action Council received about 35,000 of them through July 1st when the public comment period closed. On the slide, you can see the first layer of general topics by which all of the comments were sorted. And on the right side of your screen, you can see the key topics of the email campaigns. About 3/4 of the comments we received could be attributed to an email campaign. I oversaw the handling of the comments on climate and equity, and then those that were related to that, I then sorted them by chapter to the appropriate chapter that related to that specific topic. Each chapter staff team was responsible for proposing to the Climate Action Council how their chapters, the draft chapters, should be modified by the comments. Next slide, please. So starting at the September 13 meeting, there were proposed updates to each chapter that were presented before the Climate Action Council. As you can see, most of the proposed updates have already been presented on. The only ones that remain are climate justice and electricity. And in cases where the previous input that you gave was not incorporated in the draft scoping plan, staff provided a recommendation on how it could be incorporated in the update in each chapter. So as far as the next steps, the council members are going to review the proposed updates to the drafts of the chapters that were presented on in September in advance of their November 7 meeting, so that they can begin to deliberate on incorporating the updates. Those proposed updates that were presented on in October, on October 13, and that will be on October 25, those will be shared with the council members in advance of the November 21 meeting. And I just want to note that we have not yet received your input on the economy-wide chapter because that wasn't part of the advisory panels on which you initially provided input. So your input on that is definitely requested. And if you would like to engage, please email me and copy Alana, and we will go through the process. And with that, I will turn it back to Alana. Thank you.
Thanks, Samir. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go over our next steps with regards to, where we're going, where we're seeing. I'm really excited. We had a very productive meeting. Even though we did start late, we are actually right on time. So talking really fast in the beginning really did help a lot. So one, want to say it really is great to see everyone here today. I know we had a pretty long summer break, so it's really nice that we can get back together. We do have a lot of work ahead, and I am definitely ready to dive head first and get done with the criteria so we can move on to the other work that we'll be doing throughout the rest of the Climate Justice Working Group's profile. So with regards to the next steps, first with the disadvantaged communities criteria and the finalization, I'll send everybody an email sort of discussing what we're looking at doing, just sort of reminding folks, and I'll definitely make sure that this presentation is available in our SharePoint. And, the staff will revisit the timeline to see if there are ways that we can, shorten it, take maybe by a couple of months, come a little bit closer to the scoping plan so that we are providing people with criteria that they can use to make their policy and funding decisions. Also look to plan meetings ahead of time, keeping an eye on folks' schedules, and I'll be sending out a survey just to get an idea of what days and times are good for everyone. And if folks would like to get, and I'll send out an email just with a reminder for everybody, if folks would like to get back to me with potential dates that I would need to work around. I know that we're getting towards the time of year where we're having our galas and major conventions and meetings, so I definitely want to make sure that we are working around any of those events so that people don't ever have to think that they have to, miss a meeting. We definitely want to make sure that we don't have to make that choice. Other than that, for proposed air training, the air team is definitely going to follow up with interested members regarding the Actima Pro training. We did have a little bit, we touched a little bit on benefits and investments in the beginning. We did decide, just to kind of quick go over that, we did decide earlier this year as part of Climate Justice Working Group meeting on considerations for how the state could meet the benefit investments mandate in the Climate Act. So the state team has been very actively working on developing a methodology for measuring and tracking investments and benefits to the disadvantaged communities. And we are developing a process for agencies to report on investments and benefits. And we definitely want to dedicate some future time at a future meeting, most likely maybe sometime in December, to provide an update on the work and get everyone's input on the structure and strategy. Sonal?
Thank you.
You were muted.
Just a question, a process question. When are we expecting, and this is maybe, this is a right question. When are we expecting a clear definition of disproportionate burden? And do you have any update on that?
I do not have an update on that. I will look into that. Oh, Adriana has her hand up.
Clarifying question, Sonal, are you asking disproportionate burden as it relates to Section 7.3 of the Climate Act?
Yes.
Okay, I can get an update for you and we can follow up with you on that. I don't have the information in front of me right now, unfortunately.
Thank you.
And also with regards to the proposed economy-wide policy discussion, we don't have any of our, Jared unfortunately isn't here unless Jared is on. I can't see if Jared is on or not. Or Maureen.
I am on, Alana. What was the question?
No, you are on. Okay, so no, I just in case you wanted to expand on anything that I said, as Samir, just so you're on, just in case someone has a question, with regards to the proposed economy-wide policy discussion, Samir did mention that the Climate Action Council has been working in subgroups to finalize the scoping plan. So the members of the economy-wide subgroup are interested in the perspective of the Climate Justice Working Group and on potential policies. The subgroup has developed 2 approaches for consideration, but they would definitely like your input before presenting it to the Climate Action Council for consideration. It wasn't a chapter. The chapter wasn't part of the advisory panel recommendations, so there really isn't a Climate Justice Working Group perspective on it. Jared, I don't know if you wanted to expand on that a little bit further.
I think that was a good description of where we are, Alana, that we will be revising the draft economy-wide chapter consistent with the presentation that was made to the council. But we would like the Climate Justice Working Group input if the Climate Justice Working Group wants to provide that input, because that input hasn't yet been provided. So we can schedule a separate meeting with anyone interested to obtain that input. I sort of leave that to you, how best to manage, Alana, but we're available to provide sort of the briefing that was provided to the council, if that's of interest.
Thanks, Jared. Adriana?
I think we have some interest here in following up on that point from Rolla.
Great. So if folks would, get back to me if they're interested in following up on that, send me an email, copy Samir, or send Samir an email, copy me and Adriana, and we can definitely look to set that up. Okay, so sort of to wrap things up, because we're getting a little bit closer, the goal will be to, like I said, set up future meetings ahead of time so that everyone knows exactly when we're meeting. It also helps for logistics purposes and for our amazing staff at NYSERDA and DEC who scrambled a lot to get all of our meetings set up in all of our locations done, and did it really without losing their mind. So I really just thank you so much to everyone for that hard work. But yes, we'll definitely make sure that we're a little bit more organized. This is the first time we've been in person, so it's expected that there'll be a few kinks and a few bugs in that, but we hope that the rest of the meetings will go much smoother. I think this one was not so bad, and I think they can, but we can definitely be a little bit smoother. So I think that we will definitely make sure that we're putting things ahead of time so folks know exactly where and when, exactly what they're going to discuss. Like I said, I'll send out an email tomorrow with a SurveyMonkey survey and probably a doodle poll, just to get an idea of what dates will work best for folks to start setting up this calendar of reoccurring meetings, and to also highlight some of the things that we discussed today, re-engaging on the economy-wide subgroup, having potential subgroups to discuss areas of the disadvantaged communities criteria to focus on, and sort of a couple options and reimagining of the timeline so that we can potentially finish a little bit sooner. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, or comments or suggestions? Okay, good. Does anybody have any questions or concerns before on anything else that we covered today? Or anything that we'd like to repeat, anything you'd like to go back over before we come to an end? Because, we've got 6 whole minutes. I don't want to take any time away from anybody.
Alana, I'm happy to sit here now and do this, or I assume you're going to share these slides with us. I didn't fully digest Samir's slide with the CAC comment kind of themes, and I would love to, if you just want to pop it up on the screen, I'll sit here and everyone else can leave, or are we going to be receiving these slides like fairly soon, probably?
Yep, I will put them in the SharePoint.
Great, and yeah, thank you to whoever just put it back on the screen.
Sorry if I went too fast. You can also email me if you have more questions on that.
Thanks, Samir.
All right, well, thank you everyone for being with us here today. We'll definitely look to, like I said, set up those meetings as soon as possible. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. But for folks who joined us via WebEx who are watching this, if you do have any questions on Climate Justice Working Group procedures or anything like that, please feel free to email us at climatejusticewg@dec.ny.gov. Other than that, thank you so much to our staff members and other support who really helped bring this all together. And we will see you all very soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, and thanks so much to Alex. I didn't forget you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we'll see you guys soon. Thank you.
So I believe they're capturing all the chat, and we'll be able to send that to you. Typically on these WebEx meetings, they will have a list. It'll be a format that you can kind of read through all the chats and answers. So I was trying to manage that